بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم سيدي فيا ليتنا يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين بارد الخلائق أجمعين سيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا مولانا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين اصطفاهم الله أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على. My respected elders, my respected brothers and sisters, I bid you all assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm extremely excited and humbled to be here once again in London. It's been about 2 years since I've been here last time, and I really miss this place and the kind people of London. So I want to thank everyone for having me, first of all, and for the success of this majlis, and for the acceptance of the a'mal. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. I start in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal, the omniscient, the omnipotent. All praise is due to Allah for giving us the ability to exist and for allowing us to interact with our existence. And it's quite interesting to note and to say that as we exist on this world, you and I start to encounter our world a bit differently. The way we start reacting to the things around us, and the way we see things, and the way we evolve allows us to change our worldviews from something which was and something which is to be. And human beings, this is no new phenomena. The way we've been changing over time is at an increasingly extended rate. It's been a rate where you and I are changing at a very astronomical numbers. Technology is swiftly changing us, and our reality is becoming a much different reality. And compared to the way we used to think, to the way we actually think now, the world has gone a very, very far and grand change in the very scheme of things. And to the reality of everything, our religion and our faith and where we live and our times are changing and shaping what we are. And hence the lecture series are titled The Reality of Religion, because it's extremely important to understand and to see what is the importance and the reality of my religion. And mind you, this is not a lecture where I stand here and I tell you A, B, C, D, E, and F is exactly why religion is good and why you should follow it, because that's typically the norm of how I present my religion to other people. But this analysis specifically wants to see where we came from and where we are. And at one point do we start tackling the questions that are coming up about religion and its very core of why it's important or why it's even necessary. Because with the changing world today, and specifically with the secular movement, many people come forward and ask and say, look, there's so much bloodshed in the name of religion. And there is so much hate and attacks and killing. I mean, within the past 30 years or 40 years, or even more, 100 years, most of the wars that's happened, someone has used religion to create that war. And people come forward and ask if religion causes so much division around us, and if we are not progressing as a nation, then what is religion doing for us? Because the main question is this: when the Messenger of Allah Muhammad came to Arabia, he took a group of people who were almost at a Neanderthal level, people who were extremely backwards in their thinking and in the things they did, and took them and moved them up to pedestals to make them one of the best and greatest nations. And people specifically today are asking and say, look, if Islam was such a great religion, then where are the results of those religions? Because if anything, the Muslim community and the Muslim population has become a group of individuals who are a reactive group of individuals. People who react to catastrophes and problems when they come forward. And most importantly, many young people are asking, within the day and age and my modern times, what's the need of religion? Not only the fact that God tells me, but what's the practical need of why I need some sort of religious understanding? And the reason it's important to examine the past and now is because we kind of see the evolution of mankind, where we were and where we are going specifically. If we look at the way humans used to think, quite interestingly, it's very different than the way we think now. The way people used to think before, and I'm talking earlier on in the 1600s or perhaps the 1500s, and to compare it to the way we see the world now, the scope and the way that people used to view the world was a very, very limited scope. It was a very limited understanding of how the world worked. The very idea was, you and I as humans are the center of the universe, and there's nothing outside of that center. You and I compose the whole world because everything is surrounding us. People thought that the sun and all the planets rotated around us. Our gravitational axis was the center of everything. We were the center of this grand scheme and this grand universe, and we are it. There is nothing out there more than us. We are what we are. And people for a long time were content with this idea that we are the middle of everything. Everything rotates around us. We are safe and happy where we are, and there's nothing greater than what we see. And it's interesting because as time advanced and as science brought new things forward, we started realizing, hold on, there are some things which are not being mentioned, and there's a whole reality which hasn't been delved into. And that reality is that people soon started to find out that no, we are not the center of the universe. We're not the center at all. And not only that, but the sun and everything rotates around the sun, and there are many different universes. And people slowly came to find that at one point we thought we were the center of everything. Scientists came forward and shattered that and said, no, you're not the center. You're actually a small, minute speck. So small that you are not even to be seen in the universe with a naked eye. You must use a telescope. And all of a sudden, that kind of shook the very foundation and core of humanity. Because after realizing that I was the center, all of a sudden that's been broken, and we start realizing, no, there's so much more out there. And as we started discovering the universe more and more, our reality was struck so much more. We started realizing that the universe is expanding at such a speed that it's infinitely expanding. It's getting much larger and larger as time goes by. And to go further than that, we are getting smaller and smaller because the universe is expanding. That we're not really the center. And mind you, we're only a speck in this greater reality that we see. And what that got people to think about was, if I had something so cemented in my knowledge at one point that I was the center of the universe, and something came forward and really shook my whole understanding of the world because I actually questioned it, then imagine how many things and how many realities I can change within my own life if I simply go out and question everything that I see around me. Because people started realizing my life is changing. I mean, to go from being the center of the universe to being just a speck in the universe got people to think that, am I as important as I think I am? Do I matter as much as I think I matter? And furthermore, if I am one from millions and millions of planets, what makes me think I am right? People started asking much more questions, which kind of paved ways for a scientific movement, right? Within the 1700s and the 1800s. Within the age of the Enlightenment, people started asking, am I the right religion? Am I following the right thing? How do I know my prophet is the prophet of God? There are thousands of religions out there, if not millions. How do I know that I am right and everyone else is wrong? How do I know furthermore if I'm going to heaven and everyone is going to hell? How am I so certain and so sure what I have is the best path and everyone else is wrong? These questions have been asked for the past century or 2 centuries, and they've really boggled the mind of philosophers, and religion is kind of at the core of this discussion. Because you've got people who come from the secular school of thought and say, look, take religion and put it aside. And you've got people from the religious school of thought who say, no, religion has much importance in our life, let's keep it. Within those religious sects, many people come and say, let's change religion. Some say, no, keep it exactly the way it is. And these are the questions that we want to delve into within the next 10 nights because they're extremely crucial. And the issue that we have is there's an extreme Muslim crisis. Muslim crisis in the sense that I don't know, where do I belong? Who am I? Meaning many people say, look, there's so many different maraja. I follow a different maraja. This person follows different maraja. There are so many different religions out there. There are so many different schools of thought. I go to university. I hear something very different than what I hear at the masjid. I'm just confused. And it creates a very strong rift or a very strong change within people. And that's kind of what we want to examine. And it's interesting when we highlight the Quranic exegesis and the way that the Quran moves of how we should tackle the issue, it's extremely clear in how we should understand our reality and our ideology. Because if we examine the stories of the Quran starts off by setting a very interesting narrative, right? And many people miss the point of this narrative. The point of the narrative is when Allah asks the angels and shaitan to bow down, right? God asked the angels to bow down. The angels ask Allah, said to him, "Oh Allah, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاء." Are you going to put on earth an individual who's going to tamper with the world that you have created and cause bloodshed? Now, you have to think about the question here because they're speaking to an almighty and an all infinite in knowledge. What's the comparison of an angel to the comparison of the knowledge of who? Of Allah Azza wa Jal. It's almost as if infinity to nothing. When Allah decrees, immediately what do? The angels, their immediate response is, "Oh Allah, we have a specific objection to that what you're asking. We want to object. We have the right to object, and we want to question the wisdom behind what's happening and why this is going on," right? And it's almost as if these angels are asking the Almighty and telling Him, "We have an objection to what you're saying." Now, the ones who are asking here, the gravity of the situation is you've got angels who are asking, ones who've been worshipping Allah for thousands of years, right? These are individuals who converse with Allah Azza wa Jal, who Allah has set specific tasks for them, meaning the level of certainty they have must be a very high level. You've got, for example, a jinn like shaitan worshipped Allah for 60,000 years. There's a lot of credibility there in that amount of worship and the time of worship. When they ask Allah, "Oh Allah, we object to that what you have to say, and our objection is, will you create someone who will destroy the earth?" Immediately God's reaction is what? God's reaction is, "Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun." I know that which you do not know. And the beauty of God's understanding and God's infinite knowledge is that as much as He knew, and as much as He is more knowledgeable than the angels, His immediate reply is, "Even though you're questioning me, you still have the right to question. I'm not going to come here and tell you you're wrong. I'm not going to come here and tell you you can't question. I'm not going to come here and doom you and damn you and put you in hell because you've asked or questioned about a specific authority that I have. But you will see that there is benefit and fruits within that labor that I'm creating." And that's an important point. Because if the angels who've seen the creation of Adam, who've witnessed Allah's grace, who have specific tasks given to them by Allah Azza wa Jal can question, then what does that say about my reality and your reality where we have not seen any of that? How many questions should we be asking? And not only that, but we were never present in the creation of Nabi Adam. We were never present in the Prophet having or receiving the religion of Islam. We weren't even present when the Quran was established. We never even got to see an Imam. And the Messenger of Allah has a hadith where he says, "The strongest ummah is that ummah which will never see me but will believe in me because they know why I'm there." And perhaps we'll dissect this hadith to see why was he actually there? And how is it possible for us to believe even though we don't see? Because it's kind of a paradox at times. Belief needs a lot of evidence. And it's interesting to note that you and I, we live in these lives where we haven't really seen as much as we would like to see. Because we never were able to get this vision. We never saw the creation. We never saw a miracle come down from the sky. We never saw Imam Ali valiantly in battle. We never sat next to the Prophet. We never saw the Qur'an's verses coming down to the Prophet. So how do we have such strong belief? And that's a very important point. Because it brings up this idea that have we been asking enough questions? Because if the angels are asking questions, then what does that say about the questions that you're asking and I'm asking? Surely we should be asking a lot of questions because we haven't seen as much as they've asked. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And it's interesting to note here that this movement of asking and questioning things and really looking deep down within you to say, what do I believe? Why am I the way I am? Am I convinced in everything that I see? How do I know the Prophet compiled my Quran? Where is my Imam if I don't see him? What is this religion about? How did it come? What are all these questions that are coming forward? We'll answer some of these questions, but a lot of these questions I want to be instilled within us so that we start to realize that I really believe, but I haven't been asking enough questions. And this concept of asking questions should be very much promoted. And it's important for it to be promoted because the culture that the messenger built was a questioning culture. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the way that Islam works, and I want to get to this reality that we're talking about, what is the reality of religion? Many of us, the way we see religion to us is a set of laws and ideas and theologies that were given to us by an individual 1400 years ago. And we are to take these ideas, theologies, understandings, follow them until the day we die. And then when we die, we will hopefully see either paradise or hellfire. That religion to us is an establishment given to the Prophet, where the Prophet was told, "Oh Muhammad, here is the law, here is the theology, here is the belief. Feed it to your people, give it to your people, let your people follow these beliefs until the day you die. And then that's it. They will succeed and they will see heaven." Is that the reality of religion? Is that what religion is about? Is it as petty as that? Where Allah said to the Prophet, let these human beings or sheep follow what you tell them. Tell them what you need to tell them. And after that, they will either, succeed or they will kill each other because of certain ambiguities. What is the reality of religion? And it's interesting to note here that religion is not a name for a specific movement. When we say Islam, Islam is not a name for a religion that the Prophet brought down and gave us the laws to and the theology to. But religion is a name of a reality, or Islam is a name of a reality that's been existent ever since the time of Adam. And it's a forward-moving progression that culminated and peaked in the time of Rasulullah Muhammad. And the question that we ask is this, is if we know within the Quran, Prophet Ibrahim comes forward and he says what? He says within the Quran, I am the one who named you Muslims. Allah says that your father Abraham named you Muslims. Abakum Ibrahim samakum Muslimun, right? Your father Abraham named you Muslims. The question that we ask is if Nabiullah Ibrahim gave us Islam, that Prophet Ibrahim, when he came and he named Muslims, he gave the name Islam. The question that we ask is before Ibrahim, what religion was there? Because the name Islam wasn't there. Right? The name Islam had come in the time of Ibrahim. So before Ibrahim, what name were the people given? Or what religion were they? Because we know the actual name was established in the time of Ibrahim. And the answer to that is before Ibrahim gave the actual name Islam, the reality of Islam was still existent. Because Islam, as much as it's a noun, it's also a verb. A noun in the sense that the name is there, but a verb in the sense that it's a movement and an action of submission. Even though you might not be called a Muslim, the concept of Islam is still in an individual's heart. And that's why before Ibrahim, the idea of Islam was still there. Adam was a Muslim. Nuh was a Muslim. Lut was a Muslim. All these prophets, even though they came with a specific name for their people, they were all still called Muslims. What I'm trying to get to here is to get us out of this thinking that Islam is simply a set of laws given to a man in a desert 1400 years ago, where he told us, here's your theology and here's your laws. Take it and fly with it because that's all you need. And religion is much more than that. It's a whole human movement. It's a human culmination. It's a human progression. It's started from the beginning of Adam and it doesn't end until the end of times because there's such a strong movement there. And religion has always been that way. And mind you, when the Prophet came to Arabia, we have this ideology of how the Prophet came. That the Prophet came to the Arabs and said to them, Arabians, you guys are all in the pits of hell. Let me kind of give you this religion so you can take it and fly with it. And that reality is so flawed. It's so wrong in the way the Prophet taught the Arabians, and the way he taught them was such a superb way that, mind you, it made his mission much easier. Because when he came to Arabia, when he first came to the Arabs, many of us would think that if a prophet comes to Arabia, the first thing he would say to these Arabs, because as we know, the time of the Arabians was no normal time. And what I'm trying to say here is, just to kind of show you how unwanted and how ridiculous their community was, the Arabians were never ever taken over by any empire. The Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, right, were the two main empires who led and organized and ruled all the geographical locations at the time. You were either a Byzantine or a Persian, no between. So Arabia, the question that we ask is, what was Arabia's significance? Was it a Byzantine Empire or was it a Persian Empire? Which part was it to? And the answer is, Arabia was not part of this one nor this one. Because Arabia was so insignificant, people wanted nothing to do with it. They wanted nothing to do with this place. And when we speak about the aristocratic Arabs, interestingly, people come forward and they think, you know what? Because they've got 3 or 4, sheeps or camels or so, then they must be very aristocratic or rich. And compared to the Persian, to the Byzantines, Arabians were very poor, drastically poor. We're talking about a time where women were forced into prostitution, right? Brothel houses were created to force women into prostitution. We're talking about times where a girl was not simply buried, right? We always hear that women were buried, but long holes were actually dug for them. And these girls would be taken and they would be dropped from the top of the hole to the bottom. When they'd hit the bottom of this long hole, every bone in their bodies would break. It was such a cruel way of killing a young child. You're talking about people who, when a husband dies, his wife becomes ownership and a slave to his son. You're talking about a people who sold and bought women in markets just like slaves. It was a very horrid culture. Rape was very prevalent. Killing was very prevalent. Laws in Arabia with regards to any sort of trade, buying and selling, were non-existent. A very, very dark time. And you'd think that when the Prophet came to these people, because if you want to really know what his message about, you go to this man's earliest days. What are some of the earliest things he talked about? Right? Surely it must be, oh Arabians, put on your hijab, for example, right? It should be some sort of law. Or, oh Arabians, make sure you observe salah. Or Arabians, make sure you're giving zakat, or make sure you're giving khums. Make sure you're doing one of these things. Because many people think that he came with a very law-oriented religion. He told them immediately, crack the whip, people, start changing what you do. What were the first words that the Prophet uttered when he came to Arabia? First words, if we go back in the books of history, one of the first hadith he said to the Arabians was, O people of Arabia, reflection for 1 hour is better than 70 years of all of your dry worship. In other hadith, he would change that. He would say, reflect for 1 hour, it's better than 1,000 years of dry worship. Because what he's trying to tell them is, this Islam I'm giving you is no religion where you sit and I give you laws and you follow it. But this is about you bringing out the religion that's inside of you. And that's why religion, Islam, at the beginning was an essence that every human being had in his heart. Why do you think the Quran comes forward and says to the Prophet, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَى? What's he meant to remind them of? How can he remind them of something if it's not already in their essence? And when he comes and says, the Quran says, فَذَكِّرْ, he's telling them, oh Rasulullah, remind them, bring forward their human essence, the humanity that is the original form of Islam within them. And that's why he knew, if you examine the Quran, open it, look at the Meccan verses and the Madani verses. The Meccan verses have nothing to do with Islamic law whatsoever. No Islam, no law, none of that. But the Madani verses have a very strong deal to do with Islamic law. The reason it was done that way is because the Prophet knew, I'm not here to herd these people like sheep and cattle in order for them to come and accept these Islamic laws. But there's a much bigger movement that I'm trying to spread. That movement was him trying to get them to question their very essence of why do I believe this and how do I believe in it, and to really inspire them to make that change. I'll give you an example. One day, there's a man by the name of Amr ibn Jamuh within Arabia, who dies later in the Battle of Badr. Amr ibn Jamuh is a very old man, and within Arabia, he had many sons, 5 different sons. These 5 different sons in Arabia slowly started becoming very interested in Islam and coming forward and converting. And when they would go back home, he would get a sense that, you know what, my sons are converting to Islam. And he was an extreme lover of Manat. Manat to him was everything, right? Anything he needed, he'd consult Manat. Any type of movement or action that he wanted, he'd consult Manat. And the way Arabians did it is they take a woman, like an oracle lady, and they'd put her behind the statue and they talk, they'd, you know, burn some saffron, they talk and the oracle would reply to them as if it's the statue. Foolish thinking, but that's what made sense to them, interestingly. So he was in love with Manat. One day his son walks in, his son reciting, he hears him reciting something. And as he walks in, he hears his son reciting. He's reciting the words of Surah Al-Hamd. His son walks in, he's reciting Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. And he hears his son reciting this. He's sitting in the other room. Mind you, this is a very old man. He's in his 60s at this point. Here's his son, walks out. He says to him, who's been teaching you this, my son? Where did you get this from? And he says to him, Father, these are the words of Muhammad, the word that Muhammad is giving us. This is some of the first inspiration that the Messenger of Allah gave us. And mind you, Surah Al-Hamd was always a surah predominantly based on principles and inspiration. There's no law in Surah Al-Hamd, not like some other verses in the Quran. He said, where'd you hear this from? He says, this is from Muhammad. He says to him, very well. Go on your way. His son goes on his way, and he stays very baffled, as you guys would say, right? Very baffled in what he just heard. This is very new to me. He goes to Manat, and he says in front of Manat, he says, look, Manat, I'll be very honest with you. I heard something today which you've never given me before. And we'll go through this as to why poetry was so powerful in Arabia. We always go over that it was powerful, but why was it so powerful? We'll go over this, inshallah, one of the night's lectures, because it has a very huge role in the Prophet's success in Arabia, pivotal role. So he says to him, I've never heard anything like this. And he leaves the saffron and he leaves very angry. He says, I'm very upset with Manat because I've never heard anything like this. I'm kind of confused at this point. He goes to sleep. His sons hear him make this claim. His sons hear him next to Manat. So they devise a plan. What they do is they come in the middle of the night and they take the statue Manat and they tie one side of a rope to Manat, and one side of a rope they tie it to a dead dog. Right, to a dead dog. They take them and they throw them in a well filled with human feces. So Manat, the dead dog, are both in a well filled with human feces. Amr ibn Jamuh wakes up in the morning going to see Manat, and all of a sudden Manat isn't there. He freaks out. Where is my God Manat? Where's Manat? Freaks out completely. He says to one of his friends, help me look for him. Her, for my statue. Let me look for her. Because Manat was a female statue, as they would say. So his friend says to him, Amr, come over. I think I found your statue. He goes next to a well, and Amr looks down into the statue. And the sight, I mean, you can just imagine it. He looks down into a well, his prized possession, his Lord, his God, his political system, his affiliation, the taxes that he gave, the sacrifices that he gave were all because of this very God who was now tied to a dead dog in a well filled with human feces. His whole system was shaken. This same Amr ibn Jamuh, who was valiant against Islam later in the Battle of Badr, cries to the Prophet, saying to him, Ya Rasulullah, can I please fight with you? And his sons had to literally restrain him in the Battle of Badr so he doesn't go out and fight. Rasulullah says to them, let the man fight. Now that he's seen a specific truth, you can't stop him from that truth. Now that he's seen the reality of what life and religion is about, then you can't stop him. And mind you, Amr ibn Jamuh had never seen the Prophet before he became a Muslim. But the message rang with his intellect so well. And the message got him thinking so much. It was not a law that changed him, but there was an individual, internal religious system that he brought forward that got him to change, to come to Islam. Now compare that to the way we learn religion today, right? Most people today, the way they learn religion, and I say this quite confidently because specifically within the Iraqi Arab community, and I've seen it myself, most people, not all people, there are some people who teach religion in a very open-minded way. Most people, the way we learn religion is a very, very enforced, imposed form where you must do this when you're growing up. You must pray this way. You must fast this way. You must come and do it this way. While the first original form of Islam had absolutely no imposition on the people. People, when they came to the Prophet, there was no imposition where you had to. But people from within them started realizing this Islam is a system which is changing the way we live. It makes logical sense that it helps the way we are. And therefore most people, if not all people, were never imposed to come into religion. Most people were never imposed or forced into the religion. But if you compare that to the way we teach religion today, and I say this, from experience specifically, I grew up in a very conservative Iraqi family, and my parents, may Allah bless them, the way that they taught us when I came to America was that everything is imposed. Your religion is imposed upon you, right? Your salah is a must-do upon you. Your siyam is a must-do upon you. Your ahkam are a must-dos upon you, which is fine because we've accepted them, move forward. But the question that we ask is, do people ever reach that level in their lives where they think to themselves, you know what, even if my parents had never told me, I'd still be doing that? Because you have many people who up until the age of 18, 19 love religion. They're in love with Islam. Then they go out, they move away, they go to uni, they go different places. All of a sudden mom and dad aren't there. They can do whatever they want, and they realize, you know what, I've never even been inspired by this religion. I've never looked inside of me to see it makes sense to me. Why do I need it? Throw it away. And most people do that. And that's why you see such a lack of people who are coming towards religion, or people leaving it, because they've never been convinced in actuality. And the way that the Prophet taught Arabians was a completely drastic form to the way we teach it. Because when he came to Arabia, one of the main things that he imposed on the Arabians was ask any question that you want and you will find me here listening. You know, the culture that he created was one of the most profound cultures which you will ever see. You have young men in Arabia, which is the peak of human judgment, the peak of aristocracy and killing and punishment. You have young men coming to a man who's now in his 50s or his 60s, unheard of, saying to him, "Oh Muhammad, I have, for example, killed someone. Or I have, for example, committed adultery. Or I have a question about God's existence. Or I'm, for example, asking about this." People came to him because they knew that he created a culture where people could actually question. One man comes and says to him, "Oh Nabiullah Muhammad, tell me something, where is God?" And the messenger replies to him and says to him, "You know what, tell me where God isn't and I'll tell you where God is." He says to him, "Oh Nabiullah Muhammad, oh Nabiullah Muhammad, tell me, when was God?" He says, "Tell me when God wasn't and I'll tell you when God was." The culture that he created with the people was a culture where human beings felt confident. I can come to you and speak to you my problems because you're willing to listen. Not only that, but you'll never impose on me and make me do something that I never want to do. That's why in the time of our Imams, the very same concept applied. One example is a man comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and he says to him, "Ya ibn Rasulullah, oh, son of the Prophet, I believe, I'll be very honest with you, I believe that I have created just like your God." Now imagine Imam Sadiq being a very learned man. A man comes to him and says to him, "Look, I believe I created just like your God." You would think his immediate reaction is what? Step aside. I don't want to talk to you. You're being very stupid in the way that you're saying things. Imam says, "No, show me. How did you do it?" He says, "Well, look, I can take you to the place and I can show you." He walks with the Imam and he says to him, "This is where I did it." Imam says, "Show me." He takes a small pile of soil and he shakes it with his hand, and immediately worms appear. And he says, "You see this? I have created just like your God. I'm a creator as well." Now he says to him, "Fine. Put the worms down." He puts them down. Imam says to him, "Look, as their creator, I've got a couple questions for you because surely you've created them." Now mind you, he's taking him to the logical application of why he's not right and why he needs to rethink what he has. He didn't simply say, "Look, step away from me," or "Get away from me, I don't want to talk to you." No, I'm going to logically help you get through this, because if you get through this, it will mean a lot for you. He says to him, "Okay, as their creator, tell me, which one is male and which one is female?" He says, "Sorry, I can't tell you that. But ask me any other question, I can help you with this." "Okay. As their creator, tell me, what is the weight of each one of these?" And he says to him, You know, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. Imam said, no problem. Last question. As their creator, can you get them to go from the left to go to the right? Can you move them from one way that they're going to another way? And he says to him, I can't. Imam says to him, then what kind of creator are you? You don't know their gender, their weight, nor can you tell them to go from left to right. The man looks at him and very confidently says to him, truly God knows where to put his message. Imam, through that application, the very school of Ja'far al-Sadiq and Muhammad al-Baqir was a school which fed off the questions of individuals who came and said, look, I don't believe in any of this. Or people who came and said, you believe this and I believe this, let's debate and discuss it. And if I'm debating with you, will you judge me and look down upon me? Will you create a safe environment where I can come out and say, I have some doubts within myself? Because I tell you, there are many young people today who say within themselves, I've got a doubt, but they're not human enough to themselves to say, yes, this doubt makes sense. The number one stopper to people who have doubts is their own self. And the question that I say is, how many of us are human enough to look inside and say, you know what? There's something that's just not sitting right with me. How many are true to themselves? Look at the way man has progressed. If it was not for our inquisitive nature in science, in philosophy, in psychology, in sociology, if it was not for that fervor and that zealousy that we had as human beings to want to challenge ourselves and say, you know what, I've proven something, but I think there's a mistake in it and I can maybe hopefully move forward. If it was not for these scientific movements that we had, you and I would have never reached the level that we've reached today. And perhaps the question comes up as, have we challenged ourselves enough? Have we come forward and say, you know what, there is a group of people today who are asking and questioning, are we giving them the proper solutions? Or are we just murmuring on and on about answers to questions that we might not have? Because the Prophet created such an environment where young people could ask. Today, if a young man comes into masjid and says, look, I don't believe in God, you don't be surprised if you never see that person again. Not because people kick him out, but because of the looks that he gets. If he's asking that question, people feel like they're going to jump on him and kill him. And he's like, relax, I'm just asking that question. Then they might go to academia and the professor says, look, raise your hand and ask me any question you want. And he feels very comfortable in asking the question. And he's like, well, my mosque doesn't accept me this way, but you accept me. You have answers to things I need to get answers for. And the true question that we ask ourselves is, how many of us are human enough to say, specifically within this month, which is the month of concentration and the month of reflection, how many of us are human enough to say, you know what? I have questions which are unanswered that I need to ask about myself and my religion. Most people, I tell you, put it to the side and say, you know what, I'll just deal with it later on when I grow older. But how many people actually take it upon themselves and say, you know what, I have a ringing voice. I tell you, if you look at our Khwaja brothers, the ones who converted to Islam, most of them, in their original essence, you see them millions today, and mashallah, they're doing very well for themselves. Most of them started in India as an Ismaili sect. And God blessed those specific Ismailis which really took it upon themselves to challenge themselves and to become Shia. Because after they became Shia, they immediately moved to specific parts of Africa and started to spread Islam everywhere. And the Khwaja community, mashallah, is everywhere. Wherever you go in the world, there's a Khwaja masjid. Because those special individuals, those Ismailis, took it upon themselves to say, there is something that's just not right about what we're believing. And we have questions that are unanswered. If you answer these questions, then perhaps we can find a reality that we haven't seen before. And I tell you, if there's something important to note, is that a lack of faith is always important and necessary for any faithful forward movement. A lack of faith is extremely important to move forward in faith. When a person subjects his beliefs and says, you know what, this I'm questioning, and this I'm questioning, and this I'm questioning, not questioning out of arrogance, but comes and says, I'm looking for answers, that person will die a much more certain person than the person who never asked any questions. Why? Because within him, he was true to his humanity. I have questions that I need to ask, and therefore these questions must be addressed. And there are many valid questions today. Many people come forward and say, look, there are many dying in the world today. 60 million people died in World War II. Where is the Imam of our time? People ask these questions, and we'll go over these questions. People come and ask, there are thousands of religions today. What makes me think that my religion is better than anyone else's religion? Furthermore, Allah created 7 billion people. Is it true that only the Shia go to heaven and everyone goes to hell? Is this true? People are coming forward and asking questions which we need to have answers for. And if we don't have the answers for them, then we need to say, well, why are the answers not here? And where do we get these specific answers? But the first step is to create a culture where you and I wholeheartedly feel like if a person asks a question, I can genuinely help them. I can genuinely not look down on them, because there are certain communities where if a person asks a question, you'll never see that person again. And perhaps that's a much more powerful reality of what we see today. And it's interesting to know that when the Imam of our time comes, many people have this idea that when the Imam of our time comes and reappears Sahaba al-Asr wa Zaman, his immediate move is to take people, behead them, kill them, right, if they don't come to Islam. Is that the way that he will deal with issues? Is that the way that he'll deal with people who might not believe or people who have questions? If his grandfather came to establish a religion where he never imposed anything on anyone, but anyone who didn't want to believe had that where they don't have to believe, do you think his grandfather will come and impose and say, everyone must become Muslim or else I will kill you? Will he ever do that? But it goes back to the way that, how do we see religion? And what kind of worldview do we have about what religion is and where it's going? Because if that worldview is not there, and if the way we see religion is not proper in its essence, where it's not an imposed force, but it's a reality that comes from within, then there will be many problems to us reaching any sort of certainty that we want to reach. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to keep us on the path of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Let's recite our hands and recite Amani Jubo 5 times together. There's a lot of our brothers who are in Palestine who are being oppressed, those in Iraq, those in Syria, those everywhere in all parts of the world. Let's recite Amani Jubo together 5 times in our loudest of voices. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. One more time together. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. يا الله 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 اللهم اقض جميع حوائجنا يا الله. اللهم شافي جميع المرضى يا الله. Oh Allah, make us leaders in our communities يا الله. ويرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات نقرأ جميعا سورة المباركة الفاتحة تسبقها صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Just with regards, I wanted to explain the workshops, you know, from my perspective, because I think they're extremely important. What we've decided to do this time in Ramadan is, instead of focus the learning curve, where it's just me giving a lecture and everyone listens, I'll be honest, there's a much better, more advanced ways in teaching, but this is the method that we typically use. One thing we could do is we can have workshops, and that's something that we've tried in other communities and it's worked beautifully. So for the last 5 nights, targeted towards age groups from the age of 9 to 15, and from 16 to 25, we're going to have 4 or 5 different nights of workshops, right? 2 nights per workshop. And the topics are going to deal with, you know, they're not religious based, but what they are is the topics that are going to be, you know, dealing with a lot of different issues. The last night we'll do a discussion where it's anything that the youth want to talk about. But the first 4 nights, one night is going to be about leadership and self-development. This is based off of the LDP program that was created by the leadership board here in Britain. It's a phenomenal program. There's a lot of great activities. This is not just you sitting and me talking, but it's very engaging with the youth. We'll do a lot of activities, and it'll get people to come together to kind of understand each other and how to work better together as a team. and you'll find things about yourself that you never knew about yourself. It really inspired me. So I'd like to share it with everyone. This, of course, we'll set up tables, we'll have PowerPoints, etc. The second night, for the ages of 16 to 25, is going to be about relationships and relationship building. Okay? This is for, people who are married, not married. This is for relationships with our parents, with our friends, with our family. Because I feel like relationships are something that can make people happy. And most people don't know how to create a relationship, or how a relationship runs, or how do I actually resolve a conflict in a relationship. This workshop is based off of Dr. John Gottman's research. Dr. John Gottman is a leading researcher in the USA and in the world right now. He has a book called The Love Lab. And the Love Lab was an experiment that he did where he took about 1,000 couple, put them in offices, right, and got them to talk about their issues, and he was recording them as they were discussing their issues. And 7 years later, he tracked them, these 1,000 couple. Before he let them go, he predicted how many will be divorced, how many will happily married, and how many are just married, not happy. And when he found them 7 years later and he tracked them down, his research was up to 95% accurate. And in his book called The Love Lab, he goes through the steps of how to make an actual relationship work. How do you make a relationship with anyone, not just a significant other work, with a spouse, with a husband, with a wife, but with anybody, with a family, with a father, with a daughter, with a brother. And it's a phenomenal book, and he really breaks it down quite scientifically and quite beautifully. So that night, what we'll do is we'll do his workshop. And we'll go over all different models that he uses, and inshallah have a PowerPoint and we'll go over it. But hopefully we can all, come into this, because it's not just about lectures, but I think it's more about hearing from what everyone has to say, from the youth, from the brothers, from the sisters, because I feel like there's a lot me talking and not enough people coming in and saying, look, I've got a question about this or a question about this. And hopefully for the last night, we've been trying to work on getting a question and answer session going, or a youth discussion going, because I think a lot of questions are going to be stirred in the next 10-night lectures and majalis, and I want to clarify a lot of things on the final night if anybody has questions or comments, suggestions, or criticism. Once again, thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.